The Bhagavad Gita, 6th chapter, Nirvana and Works in the World. In this chapter, the Gita proceeds to give us, in addition to its general method of knowledge and works, a special process of Raja Yogic meditation also, a powerful method of practice, a strong way to the complete control of the mind and all its workings. In this process, the yogin is directed to practice continually union with the self, so that may become his normal consciousness. He is to sit apart and alone, with all desire and idea of possession banished from his mind, self-controlled in his whole being and consciousness. The posture he takes must be the motionless erect posture proper to the practice of Raja Yoga. The vision should be drawn in and fixed between the eyebrows, not regarding the regions. The mind is to be kept calm and free from fear, and the vow of brahmacharya observed. The whole controlled mentality must be devoted and turned to the divine, so that the lower action of the consciousness shall be merged in the higher peace. This peace of nirvana is reached when all the mental consciousness is perfectly controlled and liberated from desire, and remains still in the self, when, motionless like the light of a lamp in a windless place, it ceases from its restless action, shut in from its outward motion, and by the silence and stillness of the mind, the self is seen within, not disfigured as in the mind, but in the self seen, not as it is mistranslated falsely or partially by the mind and represented to us through the ego, but self-perceived by the self. The main stress here has fallen on the stilling of the emotive mind, the mind of desire, and the senses which are the recipients of outward touches, and reply to them with our customary emotional reactions. But even the mental thought has to be stilled in the silence of the self-existent being. Now the question arises here, is it not safer for the yogin to give up life and activity and live in the inner samadhi? Should not that be the law, the rule of this highest spiritual condition? No, for the liberated yogin there is no other law, rule, dharma, than simply this: to live in the divine and love the divine and be one with all beings. His freedom is an absolute and not a contingent freedom, self-existent and not dependent any longer on any rule of conduct, law of life, or limitation of any kind. The Gita brings in here, as always, Bhakti as the climax of the yoga. That may almost be said to sum up the whole final result of the Gita's teaching. Whoever loves God in all, and his soul is founded upon the divine oneness, however he lives and acts in God. And to emphasize it still more, after an intervention of Arjuna and a reply to his doubt as to how so difficult a yoga can be at all possible for the restless mind of man, the divine teacher returns to this idea and makes it his culminating utterance. The yogin is greater than the doers of ascesis, greater than the men of knowledge, greater than the men of works. Become then the yogin, O Arjuna. The yogin, one who seeks for and attains, by works and knowledge and ascesis, or by whatever other means, not even spiritual knowledge or power or anything else for their own sake, but the union with God alone. For in that all else is contained, and in that lifted beyond itself to a divinest significance. But even among the yogins, the greatest is the bhakta. Of all yogins, he who with all his inner self given up to me, for me has love and faith, him I hold to be the most united with me in yoga. It is this that is the closing word of these first 6 chapters, and contains in itself the seed of the rest, of that which still remains unspoken, and is nowhere entirely spoken. For it is always and remains something of a mystery and a secret, the highest spiritual mystery and the divine secret.
Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Anashritah karma phalang karyam karma karoti yaha sasanyasi cha yogi cha na niragnir na chakriyah yan sanyasamiti prahur yogantam vidhi pandava nahya sanyasta sankalpo yogi bhavati kaschana आरुरुक्षोर्मुनेर्योगं कर्मकारणमुच्यते योगारूढस्य तस्यैव शमः कारणमुच्यते यदा हिनेन्द्रियार्थेषु न कर्मस्वनुषज्यते सर्वसङ्कल्पसन्न्यासी योगारूढस्तदोच्यते उद्धरेदात्मनात्मानं नात्मानमवसादयेत् आत्मैव ह्यात्मनो बन्धुरात्मैव रिपुरात्मनः बन्धुरात्मात्मनस्तस्य येनात्मैवात्मना जितः अनात्मनस्तु शत्रुत्वे वर्तेतात्मैव शत्रुवत् जितात्मनः प्रशान्तस्य परमात्मा समाहितः शीतोष्णसुखदुःखेषु तथा मानापमानयोः ज्ञानविज्ञानतृप्तात्मा कूटस्थो विजितेन्द्रियः युक्त इति युज्यते योगी समलोष्टाश्मकाञ्चनः सुहृन्मित्रार्युदासीन मध्यस्थद्वेष्यबन्धुषु साधुष्वपि च पापेषु समबुद्धिर्विशिष्यते योगी युञ्जीत सततम् आत्मानं रहसि स्थितः एकाकीयतचित्तात्मा निराशीरपरिग्रहः शुचौ देशे प्रतिष्ठाप्य स्थिरमासनमात्मनः नात्युच्छ्रितं नातिनीचं चैलाजीनकुशोत्तरं तत्रैकाग्रं मनः कृत्वा यतचित्तेन्द्रियक्रियः उपविश्यासने युञ्ज्याद् योगमात्मविशुद्धये समङ्कायशिरोग्रीवं धारयन्नचलं स्थिरः सम्प्रेक्ष्य नासिकाग्रं स्वं दिशश्चानवलोकयन् प्रशान्तात्मा विगतभिर्ब्रह्मचार्यव्रते स्थितः मनस्संयम्य मच्चित्तो युक्त आसीत मत्परः युञ्जन्नैवं सदात्मानं योगी नियतमानसः शान्तिं निर्वाणपरमां मत्संस्थामधिगच्छति नात्यश्नतस्तु योगोऽस्ति न चैकान्तमनश्नतः न चातिस्वप्नशीलस्य जाग्रतो नैव चार्जुन युक्ताहारविहारस्य युक्तचेष्टस्य कर्मसु युक्तस्वप्नावबोधस्य योगो भवति दुःखः यदा विनियतं चित्तम् आत्मन्येवावतिष्ठते निःस्पृहः सर्वकामेभ्यो युक्त इत्युच्यते तदा यथा दीपो निवातस्थो नेङ्गते सोपमा स्मृता योगिनो यतचित्तस्य युञ्जतो योगमात्मनः यत्रो परमते चित्तं निरुद्धं योगसेवया यत्र चैवात्मनात्मानं पश्यन्नात्मनि तुष्यति सुखमात्यन्तिकं यत्तत् बुद्धिग्राह्यमतीन्द्रियं वेत्यत्र न चैवायं स्थितश्चलति तत्त्वतः यल्लब्ध्वा चापरं लाभं मन्यते नाधिकं ततः यस्मिन् स्थितो न दुःखेन गुरुणापि विचाल्यते तं विद्यात् दुःखसंयोग वियोगं योगसंज्ञितं स निश्चयेन योक्तव्यो योगो निर्विण्णचेतसा संकल्पप्रभवान् कामान् त्यक्त्वा सर्वान् शेषतः मनसैवेन्द्रियग्रामं विनियम्य समन्ततः शनैः शनैरुपरमेत् बुद्ध्या धृतिगृहीतया आत्मसंस्थं मनः कृत्वा न किञ्चिदपि चिन्तयेत् यतो यतो निश्चरति मनश्चञ्चलमस्थिरं ततस्ततो नियम्यैतदात्मन्येव वशन्नयेत् प्रशान्तमनसं ह्येनं योगिनं सुखमुत्तमम् उपैति शान्तरजसं ब्रह्मभूतमकल्मषं युञ्जन्नैवं सदात्मानं योगी विगतकल्मषः सुखेन ब्रह्मसंस्पर्शम् अत्यन्तं सुखमश्नुते सर्वभूतस्थमात्मानं सर्वभूतानि चात्मनि ईक्षते योगयुक्तात्मा सर्वत्र समदर्शनः यो मां पश्यति सर्वत्र सर्वं च मयि पश्यति तस्याहं न प्रणश्यामि स च मे न प्रणश्यति सर्वभूतस्थितं यो मां भजन्त्येकत्वमास्थितः सर्वथा वर्तमानोऽपि स योगी मयि वर्तते आत्मौपम्येन सर्वत्र समं पश्यति योऽर्जुन सुखं वा यदि वा दुःखं स योगी परमो मतः अर्जुन उवाच योऽयं योगस्त्वया प्रोक्तः साम्येन मधुसूदन एतस्याहं न पश्यामि चञ्चलत्वात् स्थितिं स्थिरां चञ्चलं हि मनः कृष्ण प्रमाथि बलवदृढं तस्याहं निग्रहं मन्ये वायोरिव सुदुष्करं श्रीभगवान् उवाच असंशयं महाबाहो मनो दुर्निग्रहं चलम् अभ्यासेन तु कौन्तेय वैराग्येण च गृह्यते असंयतात्मना योगो दुष्प्राप इति मे मतिः वश्यात्मना तु यतता शक्यो वाप्तुमुपायतः अर्जुन उवाच अयति श्रद्धयोपेतो योगाच्चलितमानसः अप्राप्य योगसंसिद्धिं कां गतिं कृष्ण गच्छति कच्चिन्नो भयविभ्रष्टश्छिन्नाभ्रमिव नश्यति अप्रतिष्ठो महाबाहो विमूढो ब्रह्मणः पथि एतन्मे संशयं कृष्ण छेत्तुमर्हस्य शेषतः त्वदन्यः संशयस्यास्य छेत्ता न ह्युपपद्यते श्रीभगवान् उवाच पार्थ नैवेह नामुत्र विनाशस्तस्य विद्यते न हि कल्याणकृत् कश्चित् दुर्गतिं तात गच्छति प्राप्य पुण्यकृतान् लोकान् उषित्वा शाश्वती समाः शुचीनां श्रीमताङ्गेः योगभ्रष्टोऽभिजायते अथवा योगिनामेव कुले भवति धीमताम् एतद्धि दुर्लभतरं लोके जन्म यदीदृशं तत्र तं बुद्धिसंयोगं लभते पौर्वदेहिकं यतते च ततो भूयः संसिद्धौ कुरु नन्दन पूर्वाभ्यासेन तेनैव ह्रियते ह्यवशोऽपि सः जिज्ञासुरपि योगस्य शब्दब्रह्माति वर्तते प्रयत्नाद्यतमानस्तु योगी संशुद्धकिल्बिषः अनेकजन्म संसिद्धस्ततो याति पराङ्गतिं तपस्विभ्योऽधिको योगी ज्ञानिभ्योऽपि मतोऽधिकः कर्मिभ्यश्चाधिको योगी तस्माद्योगी भवार्जुन योगिनामपि सर्वेषां मद्गतेनान्तरात्मना श्रद्धावान् भजते यो मां समे युक्ततमो मतः ओम इति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे आत्मसंयमयोगो नाम षष्ठोऽध्यायः। श्रीकृष्णार्पणमस्तु। हरये नमः। हरये नमः। हरये नमः।
The sixth chapter, Nirvana and Works in the World. The Blessed Lord said, "Whoever doeth the work to be done without resort to its fruits, he is the sannyasin and the yogin, not the man who lights not the sacrificial fire and does not the works. What they have called renunciation, know to be in truth yoga, O Pandava, for none becomes a yogin who has not renounced the desire, will, and the mind. For a sage who is ascending the hill of yoga, action is the cause. For the same sage, when he has got to the top of yoga, self-mastery is the cause. When one does not get attached to the objects of sense or to works, and has renounced all will of desire in the mind, then is he said to have ascended to the top of yoga. By the self thou shouldst deliver the self. Thou shouldst not depress and cast down the self, whether by self-indulgence or suppression. For the self is the friend of the self, and the self is the enemy. To the man is his self a friend, in whom the lower self has been conquered by the higher self. But to him who is not in possession of his higher self, the lower self is as if an enemy, and it acts as an enemy. When one has conquered oneself and attained to the calm of a perfect self-mastery and self-possession, then is the supreme self in a man founded and poised, even in his outwardly conscious human being, in cold and heat, pleasure and pain, as well as in honor and dishonor. The yogi, who is satisfied with self-knowledge, tranquil and self-poised, master of his senses, regarding alike clod and stone and gold, is said to be in yoga. He who is equal in soul to friend and enemy, and to neutral and indifferent, also to sinner and the saint, he excels. Let the yogin practice continually union with the self, so that that may become his normal consciousness, sitting apart and alone, with all desire and idea of possession banished from his mind, self-controlled in his whole being and consciousness. He should set in a pure spot his firm seat, neither too high, nor yet too low, covered with a cloth, with a deer skin, with sacred grass, and there seated with a concentrated mind, and with the workings of the mental consciousness and the senses under control, he should practice yoga for self-purification. Holding the body, head, and neck erect, motionless, the posture proper to the practice of Raja Yoga, the vision drawn in and fixed between the eyebrows, not regarding the regions, the mind kept calm and free from fear, and the vow of brahmacharya observed, the whole controlled mentality turned to me, the divine. He must sit firm in yoga, wholly given up to me, so that the lower action of the consciousness shall be merged in the higher peace. Thus always putting himself in yoga by control of his mind, the yogin attains to the supreme peace of Nirvana, which has its foundation in me. Verily, this yoga is not for him who eats too much or sleeps too much, even as it is not for him who gives up sleep and food, O Arjuna. Yoga destroys all sorrow for him in whom the sleep and waking, the food, the play, the putting forth of effort and works are all yukta. When all the mental consciousness is perfectly controlled and liberated from desire, and remains still in the self, then it is said, he is in yoga. Motionless like the light of a lamp in a windless place is the controlled consciousness, free from its restless action. shut in from its outward motion, of the yogin who practices union with the self. That in which the mind becomes silent and still by the practice of yoga. That in which the self is seen within, in the self, by the self, and the soul is satisfied. That in which the soul knows its own true and exceeding bliss, which is perceived by the intelligence and is beyond the senses, wherein established, it can no longer fall away from the spiritual truth of its being. That is the greatest of all gains, and the treasure besides which all lose their value, wherein established he is not disturbed by the fiercest assault of mental grief. It is the putting away of the contact with pain, the divorce of the mind's marriage with grief. The firm winning of this inalienable spiritual bliss is yoga. It is the divine union. This yoga is to be resolutely practiced without yielding to any discouragement by difficulty or failure, until the release, until the bliss of nirvana is secured as an eternal possession. Abandoning without exception or residue all the desires born of the desire will, and holding the senses by the mind so that they shall not run to all sides after their usual disorderly and restless habit, one should slowly cease from mental action by a buddhi held in the grasp of fixity, and having fixed the mind in the higher self, one should not think of anything at all. Whenever the restless and unquiet mind goes forth, it should be controlled and brought into subjection in the self. When the mind is thoroughly quieted, then there comes upon the yogin stainless, passionless, the highest bliss of the soul that has become the Brahman. Thus freed from stain of passion and putting himself constantly into yoga, the yogin easily and happily enjoys the touch of the Brahman, which is an exceeding bliss. The man whose self is in yoga sees the self in all beings, and all beings in the self. He is equal visioned everywhere. He who sees me everywhere and sees all in me, to him I do not get lost, nor does he get lost to me. The yogin who has taken his stand upon oneness and loves me in all beings, however and in all ways he lives and acts in me. He, O Arjuna, who sees with equality everything in the image of the self, whether it be grief or it be happiness, him I hold to be the supreme yogin. Arjuna said, this yoga of the nature of equality, which has been described by thee, O Madhusudana, I see no stable foundation for it, owing to restlessness. Restless indeed is the mind, O Krishna. It is vehement, strong, and unconquerable. I deem it as hard to control as the wind. The blessed Lord said, without doubt, O mighty armed, the mind is restless and very difficult to restrain. But, O Kunteya, it may be controlled by constant practice and non-attachment. By one who is not self-controlled, this yoga is difficult to attain. But by the self-controlled, it is attainable by properly directed efforts. Arjuna said, he who takes up yoga with faith, but cannot control himself with the mind wandering away from yoga, failing to attain perfection in yoga, what is his end, O Krishna? Does he not, O mighty armed, lose both this life of human activity and thought and emotion which it has left behind, and the Brahmic consciousness to which it aspires, and falling from both, perish like a dissolving cloud? This my doubt, O Krishna, please dispel completely, without leaving any residue, for there is none else than thyself who can destroy this doubt. The blessed Lord said, O son of Krita, neither in this life nor hereafter is there destruction for him. Never does anyone who practices good, O beloved, come to woe. Having attained to the world of the righteous, and having dwelt there for immemorial years, he who fell from yoga is again born in the house of such as are pure and glorious, or he may be born in the family of the wise yogin. Indeed, such a birth is rare to obtain in this world. There he recovers the mental state of union with the divine, which he had formed in his previous life, and with this he again endeavors for perfection, O joy of the Kurus. By that former practice he is irresistibly carried on. Even the seeker after knowledge of yoga goes beyond the range of the Vedas and Upanishads. But the yogin, endeavoring with assiduity, purified from sin, perfecting himself through many lives, attains to the highest goal. The yogin is greater than the doers of ascesis, greater than the men of knowledge, greater than the men of works. Become then the yogin, O Arjuna. Of all yogins, he who with all his inner self given up to me, for me has love and faith, him I hold to be the most united with me in yoga. Thus ends the 6th chapter of the Yoga of Self-Control from the Bhagavad Gita Upanishad, stating the knowledge of Brahman and the science of yoga through the conversation of Sri Krishna and Arjuna. Om. Peace, peace, peace.